Catherine will speak on my behalf. Mrs. Meghan Markle has repeatedly written to the palace seeking our intervention in the Epstein matter, but, like Andrew, she must face her own consequences.
There was no public ceremony, no dramatic palace announcement, and no warning delivered beneath flashing cameras. Yet behind closed doors, one quiet decision carried the force of a royal rejection. Meghan believed one remaining connection to the monarchy still acknowledged her influence beyond Britain. Then Charles made his move. Her name disappeared from the Royal Advisory Honors Committee, and when the news finally reached California, the silence surrounding the decision became almost as devastating as the removal itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan stared at the message. The Royal Advisory Honors Committee, a discreet group through which senior royal figures could offer views on ceremonial recognition, charitable distinctions, and honorary recommendations linked to the crown, had changed membership. King Charles personally approved her removal. No consultation had been offered, no warning had arrived. The decision was finished. Meghan read the notification twice, set her phone down, then reached for it again, as disbelief hardened into anger. Harry watched from across the room and sensed this was not another palace slight. She turned and asked, "He already signed it?" Harry checked the date. His expression changed. Charles had authorized the removal days earlier. They were not being invited into a discussion. They were being informed of a reality already imposed. Harry went quiet, and that silence unsettled Meghan more than outrage might have. He understood why the position mattered. It was one of the last threads connecting her to the honors process, and losing it meant more than losing a committee seat. It signaled that the king was separating family ties from institutional influence. Meghan felt rejected. Harry felt something colder. His father might have decided ambiguity could no longer survive. Charles chose restraint rather than spectacle. He issued no criticism, made no accusation, and allowed the change to carry the message. That silence was deliberate. The monarch had removed one connection without creating confrontation, but the quietness of the move made it harder to dismiss. Meghan could challenge words. She could answer accusations. She could not argue with a name that had vanished. Harry kept returning to one question: why now? Years of tension had passed without this role being touched, yet suddenly, the king had acted. The answer did not begin that morning. It led backward to a disagreement, a conversation Charles had never forgotten, and one boundary Meghan had not realized she had crossed. What Meghan saw as a sudden humiliation had not begun that morning, and to understand why Charles finally acted, the people caught between them must first be understood. The removal mattered because this was never simply about a committee seat. For Meghan, it represented acknowledgement. For Harry, it represented one of the last fragile bridges between the life he had left and the family he could never completely escape. And for Charles, it represented something more dangerous: authority. Three people were looking at the same decision through three entirely different wounds, and none of them were prepared to surrender their version of what loyalty meant. Meghan felt the insult settle. She had stepped away from frontline royal duties, but keeping a formal advisory connection had meant something personal. Departure had not become erasure. The Crown's advisory structure, the network through which selected royals can contribute views to official decisions, gave her a meaningful link to the institution she had left. Now that link was gone. She told Harry the silence before the decision felt deliberate, almost designed to show her how little influence remained. Harry heard the hurt beneath her anger. He wanted to defend her completely, but he also understood how his father might see the problem. Charles now carried the burden of the monarch, the person responsible for protecting the crown's formal authority, and he had become wary of blurred roles. Harry's hesitation frustrated Meghan. She wanted outrage. He gave her caution. That difference made the room feel colder than the decision itself. Charles, meanwhile, had not built a family coalition. Camilla learned of the change only after he had settled on it, and her surprise was clear. The Queen Consort asked whether Harry had been warned. The king answered that the issue was structural, not personal. But even he knew those words could not remove the pain attached to them. Camilla watched him and realized this was not a compromise. He had decided where authority had to stop. William already understood more than Meghan knew. During an earlier private conversation, the prince had warned his father that half-in, half-out influence would eventually become impossible to defend. Charles sat with a thin briefing folder closed before him as his son spoke. He removed his glasses, folded them slowly, and asked, "Then where should the line be?" William did not answer quickly. The future king knew any line drawn around Harry and Meghan would become emotional the moment it became real. Meghan believed years of tension had produced this moment, but the true fracture was specific. One disputed honor, one private exchange, and one challenge to Charles's judgment had changed the meaning of everything. That line would soon be drawn, but only after a private exchange over one disputed honor transformed an old family tension into a point of no return. Every royal rupture has a moment that looks insignificant until history circles back to it. In this case, it was not an interview, a memoir, or a public accusation. It was a private disagreement over one name on an honors recommendation list. Meghan believed she was exercising the advisory voice she had been allowed to retain. Charles believed she was attempting to influence a royal mechanism while remaining beyond royal accountability. That disagreement became the moment neither side would forget. Meghan had been participating less often. Her advisory involvement had narrowed to occasional correspondence and secure conversations rather than regular work inside palace structures. An honors recommendation list, a formal set of names considered for royal recognition because of service or public contribution, still reached her occasionally, preserving a thin but meaningful line of influence. Charles had tolerated the arrangement because removing it risked another family confrontation. He wanted distance, not another explosion. 6 weeks earlier, that balance broke. During a fictional secure honors consultation preserved in a private palace account, Meghan strongly objected to a proposed charitable honor for a senior British patron. She argued that the individual represented an outdated royal network and should be reconsidered. Charles listened, then challenged the force of her objection. The king did not simply hear disagreement. He heard someone outside active royal duty, trying to shape an institution carried by those inside it. Meghan felt the dismissal immediately when Charles told her final judgment belonged to those carrying active constitutional responsibility. Constitutional responsibility, the formal duty carried by working royals who act within the crown's official structure, became the phrase that cut deepest. She heard more than procedure. She heard a reminder that she was outside the circle. The monarch believed he was defining authority. She believed he was reducing her voice to nothing. Charles ended the secure call and remained silent. An aide began gathering the briefing papers, but the king stopped him. "Leave those." Minutes later, he requested a list of every advisory role still linked to family members, no longer performing official duties. Meghan knew nothing about the review beginning behind the scenes. William later received a written summary of the exchange and spoke privately with his father. The prince did not demand Meghan's removal. Instead, he warned that the unresolved arrangement itself had become the danger. Charles listened because his son's concern matched his fear. Ambiguity could become precedent. The review ended with one recommendation underlined twice: remove Meghan from the committee quietly, directly, and without negotiation. The review may have been administrative, but the next conversation would be anything but, because Harry was about to challenge his father directly. Harry did not wait for palace explanations to arrive through intermediaries. Once he understood that Meghan's removal was final, he wanted the decision explained by the one man who had authorized it. The call began carefully. It did not remain careful for long. A son demanded to know why his wife had been excluded without warning. A father refused to apologize for drawing a boundary. And within minutes, years of unresolved resentment were speaking through one committee decision. Harry requested a direct conversation with Charles and refused to let correspondence teams carry the argument for them. Those teams, palace staff, who normally manage official messages and sensitive exchanges, could soften words, but they could not answer the question consuming him. The king accepted the call because avoiding his son would only deepen the wound. He knew this was no longer about paperwork. It was about trust, family, and whether Harry believed his father had acted against Meghan personally. Harry began with restraint, but the anger soon broke through. Meghan, he insisted, had deserved dignity, even if the advisory role was temporary. Removing her without consultation made the decision feel punitive, almost designed to humiliate her. Charles listened without interrupting. When he finally answered, his calmness cut deeper than shouting could have. The monarch said dignity did not guarantee institutional authority, and Harry immediately heard those words as a defense of exclusion rather than an explanation. Charles then revealed the trigger through their private recorded conversation. Meghan's objection during the earlier honors consultation had led him to order a wider review of every advisory connection held by relatives outside active royal structures. Harry went silent. He suddenly understood that the disputed recommendation had not disappeared when the secure call ended. The king had remembered it, studied it, and allowed it to reshape the rules around his daughter-in-law. Harry pushed harder. Charles told him the problem had never been one opinion. It was allowing someone outside the working royal framework, the official system binding active family members to palace responsibility and oversight, to influence formal honors without being answerable to that same structure. Harry understood the argument. He hated what it meant. Then the question he had been holding back finally came. Did William ask you to do this? Charles said nothing. Harry heard the silence before the answer. Seconds later, the king told him the decision belonged to him alone, but the damage was already done. Harry ended the call more shaken than when it began. He believed he had uncovered William's influence, but inside the palace, the truth about who actually drove the decision was far more complicated. From the outside, the answer appeared obvious. William had warned about blurred boundaries. Charles had acted. Meghan had been removed. But royal power rarely travels in a straight line. Behind the decision stood competing pressures: constitutional caution, family loyalty, institutional reputation, and the monarch's own fear of allowing personal relationships to create permanent exceptions. The most surprising part was not that William had spoken. It was that Charles had finally decided he no longer needed anyone's permission. Charles understood the machinery better than anyone around him. Senior household officials could advise, warn, and recommend, but the final authority over the advisory structure surrounding royal honors remained his. That structure, the internal system deciding who may formally contribute views to honors decisions, mattered because access could become influence, and influence could become precedent. The king knew once an informal privilege survived long enough, removing it could look like punishment rather than correction. William had focused on exactly that danger. The prince never demanded Meghan's dismissal by name. In a private documented briefing, he argued that advisory authority should match active royal responsibility, because exceptions would become harder to defend with every passing year. Charles heard the warning, but he also understood what Harry would assume if Meghan was removed. The monarch would be accused of choosing institution over family, even if he believed the opposite choice would weaken both. Charles admitted that fear privately to Camilla. He told her every family decision looked cruel once stripped of its institutional context. The queen consort urged him not to let the removal become personal punishment. She reminded him that Meghan would not experience the decision as a theory about governance. She would experience it as rejection. Charles answered that delaying necessary boundaries because they might hurt someone was exactly how confusion had been allowed to grow. Camilla watched him reach the final page. Charles had reviewed the earlier honors confrontation himself, and no official had forced his hand. He selected Meghan's name for immediate removal. Before the king put down his pen, she asked whether he was certain. He stared at the signature, closed the folder, and said, "I am certain the ambiguity has to end." Camilla heard certainty in the words, but no satisfaction. The next instruction made the decision even sharper. Meghan's access to internal honors briefings was terminated immediately. The loss was no longer symbolic. It would change what information reached her, what conversations included her, and what influence remained possible. And this time, there would be no quiet exception left. Once the signature became policy, Meghan discovered that losing the title on a committee list was only the beginning of what had changed. At first, Meghan could still tell herself that the removal was mostly ceremonial, a palace reshuffle designed to send a message. Then the practical consequences began arriving. Briefings stopped. Access disappeared. Correspondence that once carried official markings no longer came. A relationship with the institution was being shut down piece by piece, and this time there was no ambiguity to hide behind. For Meghan, the most painful realization was simple. Charles had not merely changed her role, he had ended it. Meghan waited for the scheduled briefing and told herself the silence meant nothing. Hours passed, no message arrived. Honors consultation materials, the internal papers used to gather views before recognition decisions, were no longer being circulated to her, and palace staff had been instructed to redirect any recommendations from the Sussex household through ordinary external channels. That mattered because the change did more than remove a title. It ended direct participation. Meghan assumed there had been an administrative delay. Then confirmation arrived. Her access had been closed. She read the message slowly, once, then again, and the anger that had carried her through the first shock gave way to something heavier. Harry found her sitting alone with the notification open. She did not raise her voice. She simply said that the palace had made certain there was nothing left to misunderstand. Harry sat beside her and read the confirmation himself. What disturbed him most came next. An archived correspondence note stated that Charles wanted the termination completed cleanly, so no future dispute could arise over whether Meghan remained an informal advisor. The king had not merely wanted distance, he wanted finality. Harry then learned that his ceremonial associations were untouched by this review. The discovery mattered because it proved the action was not a blanket move against both Sussexes. Meghan had been singled out by the earlier dispute. Meghan opened her laptop that evening and began drafting a public response. 3 paragraphs took shape, each sharper than the last. Harry read the opening sentence, then gently lowered the screen without closing it. She looked at him immediately, hurt flashing back into anger. He did not defend Charles. Instead, he said, "I think if we answer now, this becomes permanent in a different way." Meghan stared at him, stunned by the request. Harry knew silence could feel like surrender, but he also feared another statement would turn an institutional decision into an endless family war. She wanted to answer the humiliation. He wanted to stop the cycle. For the first time since the removal, the decisive conversation would happen without palace officials, advisors, or committees. Only Harry and Meghan, facing what the loss actually meant. The argument everyone expected never came. No palace representative entered the room. No advisor whispered strategy, no statement was released. Instead, Harry and Meghan sat across from one another and confronted a truth neither had wanted to say aloud. Every attempt to preserve a foothold inside royal life kept pulling them back into the conflict they claimed to have escaped. For once, the question was not what Charles had taken away. It was what they still wanted to hold on to. Meghan kept the prepared response open in front of her. It emphasized years of charitable work, defended the value of her past contribution, and expressed disappointment at the way the removal had been handled. Harry understood why she wanted to publish it. A public response, a formal statement released for media and public consumption, could protect her version of events before others defined it for her. But he also knew one statement could ignite another cycle of accusation, answer, and retaliation. Meghan looked at him and asked whether he was really suggesting she accept humiliation in silence. Harry did not flinch. He told her silence was not surrender if the position no longer represented the life they were trying to build. She pushed back immediately. To her, saying nothing risked making Charles's decision look justified. To him, answering might give the committee more power over their future than losing the seat ever could. Harry finally admitted what he had been avoiding. Part of him had wanted those remaining advisory connections to survive because they reassured him that he had not completely lost his family. Meghan stopped arguing. Suddenly, his anger about her removal looked different. He had been defending her, yes, but he had also been defending a thread connecting himself to the royal world he had left behind. Meghan reread the statement one final time. Harry sat opposite her without speaking. She highlighted the entire draft, paused, and pressed delete. "I'm not giving them another version of me to argue about," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand. She had not forgiven Charles, and Harry had not accepted the manner of the decision, but neither wanted another battle to decide who they were. Their choice created an unexpected silence. Meghan would not retaliate. Harry would not demand another public confrontation. Yet silence could not keep the story private forever. Once the updated committee membership became public, the absence of her name would speak for itself. Neither understood how quickly that choice would escape the room. Their private decision created silence, but once the world learned why Meghan's name had vanished, that silence became the loudest part of the story. By sunrise in London, a decision designed to remain quiet was quiet no longer. Broadcasters were dissecting royal authority. Commentators were arguing over whether Charles had finally clarified the Sussex relationship or deliberately humiliated his daughter-in-law. Outside palace gates, cameras multiplied. Yet the most striking part of the morning was not another angry statement from California. None came. Meghan's silence forced everyone else to decide what her removal meant, and the country divided almost instantly. Meghan saw the story spreading after the updated advisory membership was circulated, and her name was visibly absent. Palace communications offered only one restrained explanation. Membership now reflected current working responsibilities. Working responsibilities, the official duties carried by active members of the monarchy on behalf of the crown, sounded neutral on paper. In public, however, the phrase became a line separating those still inside the royal structure from those who had stepped away. Charles watched the coverage over breakfast and grew visibly uncomfortable. Commentators described the decision as a personal rejection, not an administrative correction, and the king knew why. Whatever institutional logic he had relied upon, Meghan was still his daughter-in-law, and Harry was still his son. He turned off the television mid-discussion and left the remote beside his untouched breakfast. The silence that followed felt heavier than the headlines. Meghan watched clips from California, but refused to restore the statement she had deleted the previous evening. A fictional London newspaper appeared with the front-page headline, "Charles closes the door," placing the monarch and Meghan side by side above the story. At Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered behind barriers, while one television correspondent called the removal the clearest boundary yet between the crown and Montecito. She closed her laptop after hearing the words. Still, she said nothing. Palace officials had prepared for retaliation. Draft responses sat ready in case Meghan accused the institution of humiliation or unfair treatment. Nothing arrived. Her silence unsettled them because it removed the confrontation they understood how to manage. For once, there was no statement to counter, no accusation to deny, and no fresh battle to absorb the public's attention. William understood the danger immediately. The prince told an aide that interest would fade only if nobody fed the confrontation. His advice matched, almost perfectly, the choice Harry and Meghan had already made privately. Two sides that rarely agreed had reached the same conclusion without speaking. When the noise finally began to fade, what remained was not the committee, the headlines, or the palace strategy. It was the final meaning of what Charles had chosen to end. In the end, no one won. Charles secured the clarity he believed the monarchy required, but it came at the cost of painful distance from his son and daughter-in-law. Meghan lost a royal advisory position, yet refusing to fight publicly prevented that loss from defining her. Harry was forced to accept something he had resisted for years. Leaving royal life while preserving pieces of royal authority had become impossible. The committee was small. The meaning of its removal was enormous. Charles allowed the decision to stand. Meghan remained permanently removed from the Royal Advisory Honors Committee, and her internal access to honors material did not return. The committee, a formal advisory body connected to recommendations for royal recognition, now followed a palace rule, Continuing influence belonged only to those carrying active royal responsibilities. For the king, that clarity solved an institutional problem. It did not solve pain created by enforcing it. Charles felt no triumph when confirmation arrived that no Sussex statement would challenge the decision. He read the note, folded it once, and placed it aside. The monarch had defended the boundary he believed necessary, yet he understood the cost. Harry was still his son. Meghan was still part of the family story. Authority could settle procedure, but it could not erase sadness. Meghan reached quiet acceptance. The committee had become less a source of influence than a symbol of unfinished separation. She removed the old advisory schedule from her calendar and let the empty space remain. Losing the role still hurt, but uncertainty hurt too. For the first time, she no longer had to wonder whether the palace considered her partly inside or completely outside. Harry stopped pressing Charles to reverse the removal. He remained angry about how Meghan had been treated, but he no longer asked his father to restore what had been taken away. William's role also became clear through the private palace record. The prince had argued for consistent boundaries, but he had not ordered her dismissal. The king had made that choice and accepted the consequences. The real significance was never the committee. It was the closing of one final door between competing versions of royal belonging. Charles chose institutional clarity. Meghan chose not to measure her worth by palace access. Harry chose his present life over another fight for a fading connection to the crown. No reconciliation followed. No victory emerged. What remained was painful, irreversible clarity. The boundary had been drawn, the role had ended, and everyone finally knew where they stood. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.